Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are. This is Ubuntu, a global dialogue with Africa. And today we are going to be evolving our understanding of the African American family. With me is Dr. Christina Grange. I'm excited about today's conversation. Before we get started, I want to welcome my sister, Sipoka Zikwakweni, to help open us up in a meditative session. Sipo, please.
Thank you very much, Kalu. Good afternoon, everyone. Warm greetings from the beautiful South Africa. As Kalu has said, my name is Sipoka Zikwakweni. And as always, I love being here and just really participating in these very, very important conversations. And without wasting any time, I'm just going to invite you to come to a place of stillness. And we do this just to really be intentional about being in this space, really getting intentional about the conversation we're about to engage in. And as you come to that place of stillness, I invite you to take a nice big breath, just one breath, and just acknowledge the gift of life that flows through your breath, through your veins, through your body. And as you breathe, I invite you to really connect with why you are here. And what gift do you wish to share with this platform? And what gift do you wish to receive from this platform? And just in that moment of silence, just really connect with your intention in this moment. And as you do so, just to set the tone for this conversation, I love to share a reading that's linked to the theme. And today's theme is obviously all about family. We push and pull, never letting each other farther away than necessary, needing each other like the lungs need air. There is craziness. There are battlegrounds where lines are drawn, yet we always seem to be on the same side. Our arms are linked, connected, not just through name, but a much deeper seed that we all have taken shape and bloomed from. We are family, and no matter how hard the wind blows or how many leaves fall, our tree remains beautiful. Thank you very much, Dr. Grange, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Kalu.
Thank you, Sipo. All right, we're gonna get started here. Dr. Christina Grange, welcome again. Just before we start asking questions, I wanna let my panelists know, Dr. Paul Easterling, we're gonna be engaging with our guest today on questions pertaining the African-American family. And just so you know, this is a very big topic, as you would imagine. It's a huge topic. And so we have a lot of questions ranging from just general issues, social issues surrounding the African-American family and the ways to move forward to behavioral issues, clinical type issues. What we're gonna do for the sake of this conversation is stick with some of those social issues and stay away from behavioral issues. Maybe that could be a part two. So Dr. Paul Easterling, you are welcome as you co-host this session with me. Our guest here is Dr. Christina Grange. She's a professor at Clayton State University in Georgia. In fact, Dr. Grange, I didn't know you actually went to an HBCU.
Yes.
Am I correct on that?
Florida A&M.
That's wonderful. So you are in good company because you are talking to a Gramblinite right here. So glad to have you. And then you went on to get your PhD from the Virginia Commonwealth, I believe?
Yes, I did.
Dr. Grange, why do you study the African-American family? What is unique about it?
I think there's a lot there. Thank you for the question and thanks for having me. I think that for me and all the types of research that I've done, it's been natural to connect to things that I can relate to. And as a person of African descent, as the child of immigrants to this country, my family is Jamaican. A lot of my life all of my life, I was born in the US, has been spent here. And I'm fascinated by the ways in which we make connections. People in general make connections. I'm a psychologist, so I have a particular interest in human behavior. But the way in which people of African descent make connections and maintain connections formally in the context of a traditional family, but also in terms of how we expand our web to embrace and to create extended kinship care and family is just beautiful to me. Baseline, that's my general interest. But I actually started out working with young people, adolescents, primarily African-American adolescents. And in that work, naturally their family was a part of it clinically. That was my clinical interest. And understanding girls and their behavioral choices, understanding issues around romantic relationships and sexual behavior. I started my academic career when issues around sexual behavior and HIV/AIDS were becoming more of an issue, and we were really trying to understand those patterns among women in particular, girls as a result, who are of African descent. And so all of that comes back to family. So much of how we make our choices is influenced by our family of origin, either replicating what was done or choosing something different or figuring out something in between. So that's how I came to family-based work. And the reason that I've stayed in this work is because there's a lot that we want to clarify about African-American families, narratives that have been kind of told to us that are true, some things from our family and from our culture, but also things that have been imposed on us that might not be true. And I think it's very important that we clarify our own stories and create our own truths and narratives and tell those stories. So that's where my work has kind of evolved to. While I'm a clinician, I also do qualitative research supporting families and understanding how they're creating family according to traditional and non-traditional norms, and how that can be something that we elaborate on and understand specific to Black folks, because our stories are usually unique. So I think we should understand them from a unique perspective.
That's amazing. So speaking of uniqueness, what is the African-American family structure? What does that structure look like? And also, are there some processes around the family within the African-American community that is unique to us?
Yes. Well, I think when we talk about structure, there's so many levels when we're talking about family. So I'm glad you brought up structure and process, right? Because we have structure, which is pretty straightforward usually. And then that's usually going to involve how many people are in a household, and the resources available in that household. I usually link that with structure. So when we talk about family structure and the African-American family structure, it's diverse. And I would offer that it's more diverse than we even usually reference it to be. So you have the traditional concepts of folks being married and folks not being married, so single versus married households. That's generally understood. The census pretty much gathers that information. You also have what people are talking about now more in terms of cohabitating families. That's clear, meaning folks who aren't married, but two adults who are living together. You also have folks who are married but don't have kids. And you have multi-generational families, which is something that has been part of the African-American, and I would offer a lot of the African experience throughout history, right? Especially, I know in my family, it's true. And so in a lot of the families that I've worked with, at least at different stages of the family. I also offer that we have co-parenting families, or families that you have a mother and a father who had a kid together under some kind of context. Either they were married and had a child, or they weren't married and had a child, they had a kid, they had sex, a life was created, and they have the opportunity to raise this life. This oftentimes isn't captured in when we're talking about structural things, because it's very non-structural. It actually leads to the point that you're referencing, is more process oriented. People tend to think. But I think that when we talk about single parents and we limit it by the term single, and we don't add the nuances of how people may be parenting, even though they're the head of household, how they may be parenting with someone else, we miss the opportunity to really think about the ways in which families are structured in a more comprehensive way. So I think that some of my work is focused on adding that language, like just because you're single in your relationship or single in your household as head of household, according to the government data, that doesn't mean you're singular in parenting always. It can. There's for sure that. There are a lot of single parent households, 100% all the way. But there's also a lot of households where the other parent is showing up, even if they don't live there, and they're contributing. Yes. Socially, emotionally, psychologically, financially. There are a lot of ways that people can contribute, and that doesn't get captured. And to be honest, that's been happening throughout our time, meaning the Black experience in this country. It's always been here. The ways in which people create family and the ways in which we nourish family has always been here. Unfortunately, due to the context in which we arrived in this country, and I say we meaning ancestors of people who identify as African American, was limited, right? So we didn't have the freedom to create family and support family and maintain family. And so we've had to recover from that. And in that recovery, I think that we want to make sure, like I said, that we capture the full range of what that looks like, because it's quite a miracle that we're doing it the way that we do it at all, given the trauma of the Black family in this country. So I touched a little bit on the structural piece, and there's a lot more that can be said, and I can elaborate on the process piece. But did you have any more questions about that?
No, I was just going to say that some of the things you are sharing here hits a chord with me. As someone who's African, grew up in Africa. I mean, when we say in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child, I mean, it is really the case in Africa. So I never grew up with my mom, my dad, and my siblings. I always, at any particular point in time, had extended family members, which again speaks to the fact that our family structure is diverse. It's not just the nuclear aspect that we are often taught in school. We have the mindset that, in fact, I've said this many times on this platform, in Igbo language, when we say a family is ezinolo, that's the word for family, ezinolo. It literally translates as ezi. Ezi is outside. Now olo is and inside or house.
Yeah.
So family literally translates outside and inside the house. In other words, we look at people outside the house as part of the family, people in the compound, and our uncles, our aunts, and neighbors, they help to raise a family. That is the African way. And I think what you're saying is it bleeds into the African American experience.
It is. I mean, you can't, when you talk about structure, the way that we organize things, again, largely due to economics and political issues, the way that we organize things according to family structure are what I said, right? You have these categories. But I think that we have always known, and I am constantly working to remind us that we do not need to be limited by these categories that are imposed on us. So when you look at your family of origin, you know it's complex. But unfortunately, when we internalize terms like even a married family versus a single family, it acts as though those are the things that exist, when really marriages exist in the context of a community as we experience it. Parenting exists in the context of a community. I'm very intentional about helping people to understand who's in that community matters, and we should constantly give voice to it. So helping children to understand their village of aunties, for example, right? Or when parents are having stress with their children, I'm a psychologist and I work with a lot of adolescents, saying, look, pull somebody else in. Parent, you are tired. You should sit down on this one. And so let's tap somebody else in, right? And we don't have to go far to tap someone. I'm just reminding you that you have resources beyond what you've been told you have. And those resources are oftentimes waiting to be activated. And now we can do it virtually. We can do it all kinds of ways. but we can activate those resources that have always been part of who we are culturally and honestly contribute to our survival, literally contribute to our survival. So when I grew up, similar to you, I grew up in Miami. My family's Jamaican, like I said. I didn't even have friends from school. I went to a private school and it was kind of far away. I don't remember any of those people. The people that I remember are the cousins that I was around in the house that my grandmother and my grandfather created with this pool that my grandfather insisted that we should have as he migrated from Jamaica to New York to Miami so that we could be hot and swimming in this pool all together. Those are my memories, right? And so now with my own child, we have different systems now because we don't have the same type of access. But what I'm constantly supporting people and realizing is you can create villages all the time. And so Kalu, I think that's what we want to fold into the children that exist now and the next generation. We have some challenges with that because media and technology limits our ability to help them create community the same way that we did, but it does not prevent it. We just have to be resourceful in helping young people create the family or a version of family that can help them thrive in this country. And I think that we can do that. We just have to remember that we have the tools. And that leads us to process. So we have structure, people that we have access to, and the resources available to us. And I'm, reiterating what you're referencing in terms of that structure can kind of be fluid, right? So somebody who's in your life in this season might not be in your life for the next immediate season, but they may fall back into it. There's an author that I love. She's an ancestor now called J. California Cooper. Some people may know about her and her work. She was a fiction writer, wrote this book called Life is Short But Wide. And it's a great resource that I rephrase a little bit to help people know life is long and wide. So there's a lot of people who are going to fold into your life at different seasons and will be parts of your family, if not by blood, then by community, and will pour into you and allow you to grow and thrive, and may step out and then they may come back in. That's just the nature and the fluidity that we have the privilege of enjoying, but we want to remember it as part of our legacy as Black people in this country and all across the diaspora. So that is involving processes that involve healthy communication, that involve forgiveness, that involve grace, that involve not just being present, which a lot of times the research on Black families focus on is who is present. I would suggest presence is cool. That's pretty like a baseline, but to what degree and how are people engaged? So when people, for example, talk about traditional issues around which parents are here or there, like are Black fathers, for example, present? The question is not presence only, but it's also engagement. And research has shown that Black fathers, when given the opportunity to be, are engaged in different ways. And now with technology, even if people move, that can happen even more. But we want to amplify that and realize that it's not just about being present, it's about being engaged. And the way we engage across different types of roles in our family allows everybody to thrive, from the great-grandmother to the grandmother to the aunties, because we all, again, flow in and out of different ways of supporting each other, to the children. And that's a beautiful thing. And keeping that fluidity as a strength, I think, is an asset to the Black family and really is a tool that we can use.
That's amazing. I'm going to invite my brother here, Dr. Paul Easterling, maybe to ask us some questions, but just to support what you just said, growing up in Africa too, the concept of daycare was alien to me. And nobody pays for childcare too. So until I came to the US, I learned about that. So, it just doesn't make any sense in Africa that you're going to be paying someone to watch your child, because we are in this together. Again, speaking of that resources, I really believe what you said, we should begin to activate those resources and activate people in our network because they are part of our family, our African family. That is something I think we need to explore down the road. Dr. Paul Easterling.
Could you please elaborate on what unique challenges African American parents have when raising their children?
Yeah, I think there are many. And I think it's important for everybody, whether you are a person of African descent or not, to understand raising children in the context that was not really designed for them involves unique strategies. And a lot of that relates to the concept, which we use in the academic space, of racial socialization. So what is racial socialization? And so that involves helping young people know, in this case specifically, let's talk about Black kids, but it happens with other groups too. But I tend to focus my work on children of African descent. So helping young people to know how to survive and how to thrive, two different concepts, in a context that is not designed and often does not demonstrate behaviors that support their optimal development, intentionally or unintentionally, because sometimes that happens by default. And so raising children of African descent in America means raising them in a context that has historically worked against their best interest, there as individuals and there as a member of the Black community. And that is not easily, that's a cultural thing as an overarching part of this country. So raising children of African descent in America means that we have to raise them with the historical realities of what's been done, what's happening, and what may happen in the future. So figuring out how to survive in this space, and I'll give some examples of that, as well as how to deal with that pain and be able to be healthy and whole. So to me, racial socialization involves two levels. One is, like I mentioned, being able to know how to navigate the system to keep yourself safe. Safe is a baseline experience in the human existence. And then knowing how to thrive. So when we are intentionally using terms like Black girl magic and Black boy joy, it's because we need to help you remember that your ancestors are within you, the spirit of survival is within you, and you can flourish, even though it seems odd, in a context that is not always supporting who you are. That means that Black parents have the unique experience, and I would offer sometimes exhausting, to keep it real, and stressful experience of figuring out how to keep their children safe for doing normal kid things. So I think, for example, of skipping school. In the United States, adolescents oftentimes will do this thing of skipping school. I don't know if y'all ever skipped school anywhere. I don't know if you ever did that, but I can raise my hand and say, I skipped school. I did that, right? And so it's not good. I'm not encouraging it, but it's part of the adolescent experience for a whole bunch of different reasons. Young people may skip school. If you get in trouble at school, you should be able to go home. But using this example, two kids skipping school, let's say Jimmy and let's say Jamal, there are different risk factors associated with that. Jamal hanging out, skipping school with his friends, again, kind of a normative thing that might happen. Jimmy with his friends, Black and white, right? There are different implications for truancy, for being picked up by the police, or being addressed by the police, by getting into a police car, for going to a police station. There are different implications for Black children in terms of keeping them safe. As a result, the parenting strategies we use are going to be different, because strategies for keeping Black children safe may be different, or probably are, than strategies for keeping non-Black children, or specifically white children, safe. Those strategies that parents use in the context of the Black family, and that other family members support in different ways, be it community members or biological family, that's part of racial socialization, helping them know strategies for survival. And we know that even more now, we should be decreasing, right? Conceptually, if America is becoming less racist, we should be able to do this less.
Right.
But we aren't.
That's not the case. Right.
So that's an example of racial socialization focused on surviving. And then there's thriving, right? And that's the beauty of the community. Can help us know that when you are struggling, or when you are struggling, graduating, doing what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do, we are here to help you in all the different ways that we can get to that point of joy.
So, with everything that's going on in the last few years, and I know it's a consistent pattern that's been on for decades, but there's been conversation of how to discuss these issues of Black men and women and children being shot by police and other traumatic, uniquely traumatic experiences for African Americans. How are African American parents to deal with this or introduce this to their kids? And I'm asking this because I recently had a conversation with another parent about how to discuss these things with children. And the parent I was talking with, was very adamant on shielding their child from any exposure to that, to protect their innocence. Which I don't have a strong argument against that, except that I do believe that children do have to understand the world they're growing up in, and it's our responsibility as parents to walk them through that, not just shock them, but to walk them through, this is our experience and we have to be careful, how we maneuver through this world. So how are parents to deal with introducing their kids to these traumatic things that are unique to the African American experience?
I think you made a great point when you said don't shock them, right? Because if we only talk about things when they come up in the media, it can be shocking.
Right.
But if we contextualize things, part of socialization is exposing them to who they are before the world tells them who they are. So exposing them to the range of their history, right? Starting on different parts of the continent of Africa, introducing them to the idea of Africans being enslaved, talking about how that has evolved into racism, into the fear that white people sometimes experience when exposed to Black people, especially in positions of power like police, right?
Yeah.
And help them understand the process. This isn't like an isolated situation. The fear of Black people is deeply rooted, right? And so to me, it's helpful to help them understand the psychology of it gradually, not just dropping it on them. Not because I think that if you say isolated situations of Black people being shot, that's scary. If you talk about it in that way, in isolation, that is naturally scary to children, right? It's scary to me if I think about it in isolation. But if I understand the behavior in context, I can understand it and be more prepared to deal with it when it shows up and talk about it in the context of community and safe places. And that happens in different ways. That happens at barbershops. That happens over family meals. That happens in some types of situations in some schools, right? So the more we talk about it, the better they are able to digest it when it shows up and address it if they have to deal with it physically in terms of keeping themselves safe. So that means being able to say, yes, this incident happened. So when you hear people, if there's because the Black Lives Matter not the movement, but the visual of it in communities goes in waves. I know in my community, I'm in Atlanta, when there's been a shooting, we have an increased likelihood of seeing all kinds of people on the corner with Black Lives Matter signs, right? Now that alerts my child to that something else has happened if I haven't already told them. But I want to be able to tell them and then help them understand why these people are, holding these signs in some cases, so that it's not a shock to their system. So does that give some example of how to kind of do it progressively?
Yes, it helps.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend, is doing it progressively. The idea of protecting their innocence, kids know about differences from the age of 4 years old. They know about difference. They start to develop their own biases, and they're treated differently.
Right.
So their innocence, especially if you're not part of the majority, your innocence is pretty much being chipped away at as soon as you leave your family. So while Dr. Osari has, this village, right? And it's automatic. You could stay, speak for yourself. I don't want to speak for you, but you could stay embedded in your family village for a little while, right? And I'm not sure what your school situation was, but for most people in the US who might geographically might not be with their grandparents anymore, so might not have that kind of support, or their friends and such, they also have to work. Most kids are exposed to the institution of American education starting around age 3. I mean, with daycare. And some people have the option of choosing what kind of daycare they send their child to, but some people just have to use the free daycare, right? And so that's more institutionalized. So that means that they are from a very early age being exposed to some of the information that they're going to get later on, whether it's about their skin or their hair, that kind of a thing. And so when we think about protecting their innocence, we might be trying to protect our own more so.
Right.
You know, because they are getting these messages early about differences and about power.
Right. And kids seem to soak up a lot more than we realize. They're literal sponges. Some things that you might say around the house and your kid will regurgitate it right back to you, and you're like, wow, I didn't know you caught onto that one.
Yeah, they're beautiful that way, and they are resilient.
Yes.
I mean, I think about that with Black families, and people have used the term like broken home, broken families. And again, the idea of children being able to identify who they are and their own context is important, because there are no broken homes.
Right.
Families are diverse, and children can begin to identify that themselves. And I offer to parents, help them early before the world tells them who they are. Let them identify themselves.
So on that note, what is the correct attitude that we should have for single parents or divorced parents? How should we change our understanding of that family dynamic? Because I agree, it doesn't mean it's broken. It just means it's different.
Yes. I love the idea of evolving our language. I think anytime we can do it, we are just empowered. And I think it's beautiful because actually Black people love coming up with language. We do it all the time.
Yes, we do.
Always coming up with new phrases and new words. And next thing you know, it's being used by larger culture, but we do it all the time.
That's right.
Just within our own families and communities. So I think we can do so in a similar way, you know, when we think about how families exist. So unfortunately, it's been told to us, broad stroke, that if families were never married or divorced, but oftentimes for Black families, there's a lot of families that were never married, that the child is going to be at a deficit, right? And unfortunately, some of those ideas are internalized by individuals. And so I offer, in the effort to kind of evolve the language that we use in talking about Black families, that we should think about, what does your family have? What are the family assets? So we know that we have, like I said, divorced families and single families and married families, right? People oftentimes talk about those structures as related to the support for kids.
Right.
I offer to people that when we're talking about single families, that's different from a single, oftentimes, woman or a single father.
Right.
I think of when we say a single father, a single mother, that means a relationship status oftentimes. So being married or not is not the indication of whether or not the other parent is in the home. Just pause on that. So if you call me a single mother, I tell people all the time that's an inaccurate statement. Because I'm unmarried, but I am not without a parent who's helping me raise our child.
Right.
And I think it's a very important distinction. So if I have a friend who recently said he was a single dad, and I said, are you? Because you have a co-parent. So you're not parenting in a singular way, though you may not be married. So I think that's an important, critical distinction, because there are many people who identify as single parents, but they are not parenting in a singular way. And that's an important distinction. And so oftentimes that's called co-parenting. You have somebody who's kind of helping you parent, right? That's co-parenting. That language, I don't know about you guys, I didn't grow up with that language. It was either you were single or you were married. And there wasn't a whole bunch in between. But I saw a heck of a lot of people, thinking about an uncle of mine who was engaged in parenting, though not married, right? Engaged in that process. I saw those cousins all the time growing up, always at the house. You know, we grew up together up until a certain point. So I think that that is very important for people to, if they're married, that's clear. But when we're talking about families, and even people who are married sometimes feel like they don't have a co-parent, but that's a different conversation. But if we're talking about families, being able to think about your situation and does the other parent show up? How do they show up? Do they contribute financially? If they don't contribute financially, are there other ways they can contribute? So that we can start to identify for ourselves the nature and the structure of our family instead of continuing to use language that's been imposed on us that's not necessarily consistent with our present or our historical reality. Because shared parenting, co-parenting has been going on for a long time. But I think that when we don't give voice to it, it's easy to adopt this idea of being alone in this journey. And so to speak specifically to the question, it goes back to what I referenced earlier in terms of being able to identify all the people in the village, all the people who contribute to the wellness of this child. And I would say thankfully, because to truly parent alone would not really be what a lot of people are doing. And that is really hard work. So whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a co-parent, whether it's, you know, activating, like I often say, off other parts of the village, we want to give voice to that and help children know that they are actively in a community of people invested in them. And they will in turn be cycling back and investing in those people one day. You know, I like to tell people, you're going to be young people, your parents going to be old. You are soon, you are not soon, but one day going to take care of them. You are one day going to take care of your godmother. You are one day going to take care of your father, because they are pouring into you. And the natural process is that you will cycle it back into them. So get your mind right and get ready. And they laugh oftentimes like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Because it is.
Makes sense.
Amazing. Dr. Paul, you have any more questions? I can, let me go to the chat room here because we do have a couple of questions. And then I'll get back to you, Dr. Paul, if you don't mind. Let's see here in the chat room. I believe Sipo had made a comment earlier. Oh, someone says, this is so true in responding to what you said, Dr. Grange. I lost my parents when I was young. I was raised by my aunts and my friends, mothers of my, and my friends' mothers were my parents. I am a single mother, and my current family includes a family of supportive single mothers. Here's a question for you, Dr. Grange. Your study is interesting. Do you think there is a correlation between the African-American family structure and the seemingly more active or resourceful behavior of women over that of men? That is an interesting question. Dr. Grange.
Yes. Repeat that last part to me, because it had some pieces to it.
Yes. Let me go back here and repeat that question. Let's see. Do you think there is a correlation between the African-American family structure and the seemingly more active or resourceful behavior of women over that of men? I think what this person is heading at is saying this African-American women tend to be more successful than men. I think that is the assumption within that question. And the question, the person asking this question is wondering if there's a correlation between the more dominant or active role of women, and there's a connection between that and the family structure.
Got it. Okay. So I think it's definitely a fair question. Now we're definitely seeing because when we talk about Black families, we should understand there's a spectrum in terms of income. A lot of times people and educational resources, financial resources, there's a spectrum. A lot of times when we talk about Black families in America, we actually are focusing on lower resource families, right? So it's important to think about the range of folks, because our ancestors have worked hard or did work hard to make sure we had a range of opportunities. And so some of us are at different stages. And so what I think this question is probably speaking of middle class to upper middle class people of African descent in America. And the fact that women, Black women specifically, are trending or demonstrating higher or have acquired higher levels of education and things like that. Income is becoming higher among Black women. And so there's more financial stability among Black women as an individual, singular, unmarried person perhaps, than there has been in the past. And that can impact, for sure, decisions around partnering. Similarly, Black men are making decisions around partnering in terms of, what are the expectations? What are the gender roles? What are gender norms? What does it mean to be head of household? These ideas, again, imposed, because I don't know that we showed up with this idea of head of household. That's kind of like a government concept. So, but there's also religiosity that informs that as well, right? The man should be the head of his household and all of that. I don't know that all men really want to do that. That's a pretty big responsibility. Some do, some don't. I'm not saying guys don't want to do that, but to be the one point can be kind of stressful. So I think that when we talk about resources for Black families and the structure, I think what we're seeing is that we have options. And when I say we, I mean collectively. Men and women, Black men and women are choosing to partner differently, have children differently. And my research focused on co-parenting. It is showing us that people, for sure, not for sure, but oftentimes know they want to parent. And they know what that looks like. They know what they want to replicate from their parent or what they didn't want to replicate. But the legal process of being married, people are looking at in a different way. And I think we should evaluate everything to see if it's a fit for us. We know that there was a period wherein marriage was serving the Black community in terms of economically, in particular, from the post Reconstruction up until like the 1960s, 50s, right? And then we know that there was some political, economic things that happened in the 60s, whether we're talking about integration, whether we're talking about the criminal justice system, whether we're talking about incentives for being single, that negatively impacted that trend. So now there's been a dramatic downward trend, right? So it's like we weren't able to really marry freely during our enslavement period. And then we were, and then, we did, but then that was benefiting us, because we do know that being married contributes to some economic stability. Like, it's cool to have additional income. And then though, there was some would say intentional, some would say, others would potentially disagree, but nonetheless, this thing that happened in a significant part of our history that started to destabilize the family. And now we're at the point of thinking, how do we destabilize marriage? And in doing so, people feared that it would destabilize families, and in some cases it did. And now there's a recovery that I'd like to think is happening. But in that recovery, we have to think about, what is this going to look like? And it's impacted by a variety of factors. Like I said, the way that we're conceptualizing partnership, the way that we're conceptualizing the legal process of marriage, the way that we think about our financial resources, and thinking about, can we have family in ways that are not necessarily modeling the narrative around marriage? That's a question that people can ask. Yeah. And based on their own values, they can come to that answer. And it's not an easy question. I do think, to answer the question directly, that yes, marriage rates and people becoming single parents are definitely impacted by economics, and education, but also political issues that complicate how people join in our current cultural system. In my research, I'm offering that how people join as far as romantic unions is different from how people choose to parent. And Black families figure out how to parent in unique ways. That is a distinct question. Parenting together and creating a whole situation so that your child doesn't have to wonder about their other parent is a very distinct thing from choosing to be married. They're processes, but distinct. And there's different lines of research that explore each of those things in a unique way. A lot of my work, I'm focusing on outcomes for kids. So when I think about families who have kids, I'm interested in how are young people making sense out of their life? That's the most important thing for this next generation. We want them to help make sense out of their life so that they can thrive. And that means I've seen kids who say, I have 3 bedrooms, and they are cool with it because no one has told them there's a problem with that. And I would offer, because there's no problem with that. You better enjoy all your gifts and all your treats and all the unique things that those spaces have to offer you. So if that would be, for example, at a grandparent's house and at a mother's house and at a father's house, right?
Yeah.
Why is that a deficit? If people can communicate in a way that can be seamless enough. Because let's keep it real, even children who are in nuclear families, there's not always seamless communication. It's not like, oh, because people live in the same household, everything runs smoothly. No, that's why we have therapy for people to help them figure these things out. So I hope that answered the question in a long way.
Certainly. I think the question also reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday. I had a conversation with a friend of mine from the Caribbean, and he was telling me that when he went to school in high school back in the Caribbean, where he's from, I mean, he got into a lot of trouble. I mean, he would be considered like a bully, so to speak. And he and his friend had to actually cook a book. They changed something on the book because every class had a book that they used to track how many times that class has gotten into trouble, right? And so he and his friends had to bring another book so that when they got in trouble, they used one book to track all their issues. But when it was time to submit that book, they used a different book, right? So basically they cooked a book. And this is something kids do, right? So he was saying, this is something kids do. We had fun doing it. We got into a lot of trouble, but we did get punished for it because we hid it by using a different book. He was sharing that to say, if he had done that in the US as a child, he would have been criminalized. He would have been sent to the principal's office, kicked out of school. But even though they found out later on, they treated them like kids. He still graduated. I mean, he went to school in Canada, in the UK, in America. He's now a professor here. I'm sharing this to also say that I believe this is personally my belief system is that if you look at that question from the critical race theory lens, I believe that the justice system in America has criminalized the African-American male more than anybody else. That is my belief. Of course, it has criminalized African-Americans more in general than any other group, but in particular, the African-American male. So I think that also may play a role into who gets access, because now if your record is tainted as an African-American male, you can't get a job, you can't get advancement, you can't do much. So, so no wonder the African-American male may seem to be lagging behind. But if we were to level the playing field and not criminalize as much as we do the African-American male, I believe they will flourish. I believe in the 60s, the 50s, they flourished very well. The African-American male, the men were responsible for building the Black Wall Street that we talk about often. And they did so many things. So anyway, I appreciate the way you answered that question. But I also think there's a criminal justice component here that we should bring in, because families don't exist in isolation. They exist in society, so to speak.
Right.
Dr. Grange, Dr. Paul, Italy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, definitely agree with that point that, families cannot be separated from society that they are couched in. So these things must be taken into consideration when we think about family dynamics and how people grow within family and grow within society. We have to think about the societal pressures that may cause stress and strain on a particular person within the family. That's definitely important.
One of the
That's
things,
without that, we're kind of missing a big part of the picture.
absolutely. I think we
Go ahead.
lost Dr. Grange here, but one of the things she said that I love to reiterate is she was making the connection between African American families and African families, you know, and how African families were diverse and was very community and are still very community oriented, and some of that bleeds into the America. So I think if there are parents who are listening or people who are thinking about becoming parents here on the platform, I want to encourage them to consider recruiting folks into their network to help them co-parent, because I think oftentimes when we focus so much on the nuclear family, I believe kids miss out on uncles. And when I say uncles, I'm using the term uncle broadly. They could be friends of daddy and mommy, uncles and aunts, right? Who could really enrich their lives, right? And I also think that the parents themselves could miss out on opportunities to connect with other folks who could help them, live life. I mean, it's not just about raising kids, but it's about living life, right? So I want to encourage folks
not only that.
Go ahead, please.
I was not only that, but bringing other people into your family helps the kids understand the different contexts of life, right? We aren't all from a nuclear family. I've always felt the nuclear family was rather isolating. But having your uncles and your aunts that are not really in your family, but we call them uncles and aunts, helps your kids to see different ways of living, different ways of maneuvering through the world, rather than your narrow focus as a parent. And I think that's critically important.
Absolutely. This is Ubuntu, a global dialogue with Africa, and with us here we have our dearly beloved sister, Dr. Christina Grange, helping us understand the African American family. We have just about 2 minutes on the clock, and we could go on talking about this topic for a long time here. But I just want to remind the audience here what you just said. Love. At the end of the day, we've got to bring love to parenting. In fact, this is an aha moment that I've had, not as a parent, but also as a friend, as a brother, never to do things anymore out of obligation. I'm not going to do anything because someone thinks I should be doing it. If it's not out of love, I am not going to do it. And when I do things out of love, it feels so much, I feel so much joy, and I feel so fulfilled in the process. So thank you for reminding us to bring love to the table. I mean, that's it. In fact, that is life. Love to me is what life is all about. Dr. Christina Grange, do you want to take the last word here so we can go ahead and close?
Yes, the main thing that I want to offer in supporting families is for reiterating that we need to define ourselves. There's power in being able to define ourselves. And there is so much power in that. And I really believe that we should help them define themselves and their families and their context before the world tells them who they are and what they have. I want our young people to show up saying, this is who I am, this is how and why I'm proud, and this is, as a result, the gifts that I am bringing to this world, not just in my own community, but as you said, when we bring our power and our love, it multiplies. And this is how I'm showing up. So this is my skin, this is my hair, this is my skill set at school, this is my family, this is my intelligence, these are my talents. And I think the more that we can help them do that and do it for ourselves, modeling it, the more that we can be empowered to show up in this world from a place of power and prepared to work against injustice and work towards building communities that are even more beautiful than the ones that we've been able to create.
Thank you so much. Thanks to my colleague, Dr. Paul Easterling, for co-hosting with me. Thanks to Janisha Francis for helping us in the chat room. Thanks to all our wonderful audience for tuning in and for engaging. We appreciate our lovely guest, Dr. Christina Grange, for coming and gracing our platform and helping us understand the African-American family. Ubuntu. Ubuntu.
Ubuntu. So glad to be here.
Booyala, booyala, mama, hey.